Let's talk about the ACA Code of Ethics, Section G, Research and Publication. So, counselors who engage in research, and it's encouraged that counselors participate in research. We want to contribute to the knowledge base of the profession to help promote clearer understandings of conditions that lead to healthy and more just society. So, not only do counselors engage in research, but they participate in research. You might get links in the future to complete surveys, for example, for somebody's research. So you're going to support the efforts of other researchers by participating whenever you can. Minimize bias and respect diversity when you design and implement your own research. So let's talk about some responsibilities counselors have when they conduct research. First, it's important to consider that we plan, design, conduct, and report our research in a manner that's consistent with all pertinent ethical principles. Remember the principles of beneficence, autonomy, non-malfeasance. Federal and state laws need to be taken into consideration. Any regulations from the host institution. For example, when I participate in research, I have to submit my study through the Institutional Review Board, the IRB, and make sure it's approved through the university, that I'm following all the university regulations. And then, of course, scientific standards in governing research. So we're responsible to make sure that we understand and adhere to these state and federal and agency and institutional policies, or any applicable guidelines when it comes to confidentiality in our research practices. Just like in counseling, when we do research, we want to protect the confidentiality of our participants. When we conduct independent research and we don't have access to an institutional review board like I do here at Southeastern, you're still bound to the same ethical principles as well as federal and state laws that pertain to the review of your plan, design, conduct, and any reporting of research. So it is possible to do research without an IRB process, but you want to make sure that you're following state and federal laws. When we might deviate from standard or acceptable practices, it's important that we consult and that we observe safeguards to make sure that we protect the rights of our research participants. We certainly don't want to cause harm. That's the non-malfeasance. So it's really important. An example of deviating from standard practice might be doing some type of experimental study. For example, when they were testing out COVID vaccines, right? They were probably deviating from standard or acceptable practices. When we conduct research, we are responsible for the welfare of the people who are participating in our research study from beginning to end, and even after publication. So we need to take reasonable precautions to make sure that we avoid causing any harm, whether that's emotional, physical, or social harm to the participants. The ultimate responsibility for ethical research practice is going to lie with the principal researcher. So just to give you all an example of that, I'm participating right now. I'm writing a manuscript. We did some quantitative research. We sent out a survey to practicing school counselors. There are 10 of us who are authors on that manuscript, but I am the PI. I am the principal investigator or the principal researcher. So it's up to me, it's my responsibility to make sure that we're doing our research ethically. But everyone who's involved in research activities share ethical obligations and responsibilities for their own actions. Our research participants have rights. So just like in counseling, we do informed consent, we do informed consent with our research participants as well. They have a right to decline the request to become a research participant. So when I send out a survey, the very first page says, that they have to opt in, they have to agree, they have to consent to participate in the research, and they can just click exit and not do it if they choose not to. But when we seek consent, we're going to use language that is going to accurately explain the purpose and the procedures that are going to be followed. We're going to identify procedures that are experimental or relatively untried, because there's some risk involved with that usually. We're going to describe any possible discomfort or risk or any potential power differentials between the researchers and the participants, and we're going to describe any benefits or changes in the individuals or the organizations that could be expected. We also disclose appropriate alternative procedures that would be advantageous for our participants. Of course, we're going to answer any questions that they have concerning the procedures. We're going to be very transparent. We're going to describe the limitations on confidentiality. For example, one study I did, we collected information, and while our storage was secure, there were email addresses tied to the responses, so it wasn't completely confidential. It was anonymous maybe, but not confidential. I forget exactly how that was worded and how that worked. But we had to let the participants know up front so that they could make an informed choice. It describes the format and the potential target audience for the dissemination of research findings. Who are you seeking to inform with your research? And then it instructs the participants that they're free to withdraw their consent and discontinue participation at any time without penalty. Researchers who involve their students or their supervisees in research need to make clear to them, to the students and to the supervisees, that any decision to participate in the research activity is not going to impact their academic standing or the supervisory relationship. That's very important, because now you're engaging in a dual relationship, and they need to know that whether they choose to participate in that research or not, that there's no penalty if they choose not to. So students or supervisees who choose not to participate can be provided with an alternative to fulfill whatever their academic or clinical requirement is. Counselors who conduct research involving their clients, and this does happen and it's okay, they need to make very clear in the informed consent process that clients are free to choose whether or not to participate in the research. Counselors take necessary precautions to protect clients from adverse consequences of declining or withdrawing from participation. Maybe as a school counselor, I'm creating a group counseling curriculum for children of divorce. And so I'm going to do some research, and I'm going to do 2 divorce groups, one using my curriculum and maybe a counselor using a different curriculum, and I'm going to compare the 2. I need to make sure that the students who are involved and their parents know that if they choose to drop out of that group, there is no penalty. When we obtain information from participants through research, we need to keep that information confidential. So we put procedures in place to protect our participants' confidentiality. Sometimes people aren't capable of giving informed consent. They might be minors, or they might be adults who are unable to consent, and they might have a guardian, or maybe you're doing work on a geriatric population with Alzheimer's. They probably wouldn't be able to give consent. They might have like a legal representative. So if a research participant is not capable of giving informed consent, we provide an explanation to obtain agreement for participation from, and so we get their assent, and then we get consent from the legal authorized person. Of course, we're going to take reasonable measures to honor all of our commitments to our research participants. One thing I did when I was working on my dissertation that was also survey research, and I wanted to try to increase the number of participants that completed my survey. And so I offered a free membership to one person through random drawing who participated. And of course I had to make good on that promise. Explanations after data collection. So after data are collected, counselors provide their participants with full clarification of the nature of the study, to make sure they remove any misconception that participants might have regarding the research. So whether it's scientific or human values, justify delaying or withholding information. Sometimes we don't want them to know exactly what we're doing during the research because that's part of the research. But then if we do that, we have to take reasonable measures to avoid causing harm. We inform any sponsors, institutions, publication channels regarding our procedures and our outcomes. So we ensure that appropriate bodies and authorities are given pertinent information and acknowledgement. As appropriate, we're going to prepare and disseminate to identified colleague or a records custodian a plan for the transfer of research data in the case of incapacitation, retirement, or death. So that's just like counseling records, right? If something happens to me, somebody needs to know where that data is. Managing and maintaining boundaries. So sometimes we extend researcher and participant boundaries. We need to consider the risks and benefits if we do extend the current relationship beyond conventional parameters. So if a non-research interaction between the researcher and the research participant could be beneficial, the researcher has to document it prior to the interaction when feasible, provide a rationale for the interaction, what are the risks, what are the benefits, what could be the consequences, and these interactions should be initiated with the appropriate consent of the research participant. So if unintentional harm were to occur through this boundary extension, then we have to show evidence that we have tried to remedy the harm, that we've tried to fix it. Clearly, sexual and romantic relationships between the counselor research participant, the researcher and the research participant, that is not allowed. Not with the participants, and not in person, and not electronic. And we would not condone or subject our research participants to any sexual harassment. That would be off limits. We want to report our results accurately. And I'll share with you all in class an example where this did not, the results, they found an error after publication, and I'll share with you what they did. But we need to plan, conduct, and report our research accurately. We're not going to try to distort our data or engage in misleading or fraudulent research. Maybe we want to prove something and we think our research is going to prove it. We don't manipulate the results to prove what we want to prove. That is unethical. So it's really important when we're reporting our research that we're not misleading or fraudulent, we're not distorting the data, we're not misrepresenting the data, and we're not deliberately biased in our results. So we describe the extent to which the results are applicable for diverse populations. We don't want to, let's say, standardize a test on a homogeneous group of people and then say it's okay for a diverse participant who didn't meet that homogeneity for that test. We report our research results when they're of professional value, even if they reflect unfavorably on institutions, programs, services, prevailing opinions, or vested interests. We don't withhold results because we don't like them. That's unethical as well. If we discover that we've made an error in our published research, it's really important that we correct errors in a correction erratum or through other appropriate publication means. Counselors who supply data, aid in research of another person, report research results, or make original data available, make sure to disguise the identity of the respective participants in the absence of specific authorization from the participants to do otherwise. In situations where participants self-identify their involvement in research studies, then the researchers will take active steps to ensure that the data are adapted or changed to protect identity and welfare of everyone, and that a discussion of results does not cause any harm to participants. I participated in a study of a colleague in Washington State. It was his dissertation study, and he was writing it up about motivational interviewing and how well college programs are teaching motivational interviewing. And so when he wrote his results, while he interviewed me and he shared the interview, he did not use my name. He used a pseudonym. Counselors are obligated to make available sufficient original research information to qualified professionals who may wish to replicate or extend a study. So for example, if I want to replicate a study that I find in the library and I think, oh, this is a really good study, and it's from maybe Minnesota, and I want to see if the results would be true here in Louisiana, it's up to that researcher to make sure that there's enough information in that research that I could replicate the study here. If we use case examples in our presentations or in case examples, then we're going to disguise or not identify the people, right? So anytime we use participants, clients, students, or supervisees information in a case presentation or publication, this is only permissible if they have reviewed the material and agreed to its presentation or publication, or the information has been sufficiently modified to obscure the identity. This is really important. We have had students get in trouble in our program for this, plagiarism. Counselors do not plagiarize. They do not present another person's work as their own. So when you're doing work in classes, you don't copy something off the internet and put it out there as though it's your work or another student's work. It's really important to cite outside sources, to paraphrase. Even when you paraphrase, you need to make sure that you're citing your source. And in publications and presentations, you acknowledge and give recognition to previous work on a topic that you've done or that others have done. You always give credit, whether that is through joint authorship, acknowledgement, footnote statements, or other appropriate means to anyone who's contributed significantly to research or concept development in accordance with such contributions. So, for example, in all the studies that I've been working on recently, we share authorship. You identify someone who's first author, lead researcher, lead investigator, and then you list the other people's names, and you can choose how to do that. The principal contributor, according to our ethical code, is listed first, and then minor or technical professional contributions are acknowledged in notes. So if it's someone who just maybe edited the document and they didn't really contribute to it, they might be acknowledged in the notes section or in an introductory statement. I have one article that has been submitted for publication. It's under review right now that I wrote with two of the graduate students from our program, one who's graduated and one who will graduate in May. And we're waiting to find out if we got accepted or not. They are the second and third author on that manuscript. When we conduct joint research with colleagues or with students or with supervisors, it's really important to talk ahead of time about who's going to do what, who's going to get credit, and what types of acknowledgement will be received. So Dr. Curry from LSU and I did a research study together that has been accepted and is being published. And we had to discuss in advance. She sent the list and we kind of checked off who was going to do what. I did the lit review, she did the data analysis. We both contributed to the discussion. So she wanted me to be first author on that, so that was our agreement. Manuscripts are professional presentations in any medium that are substantially based on a student's work, whether that's a paper in a course or a project or a dissertation or a thesis, are used only with the student's permission, and they will always list the student as the lead author. So when I was in my doctoral program at the University of Holy Cross, we had to create a manuscript from our dissertation research and submit it for publication. Our dissertation chair was one of the authors, and another person from our committee was one of the authors, but the student is the lead author. So I was fortunate enough to have that manuscript accepted for publication. And when I graduated, I already had a publication under my name. You can only submit a manuscript for consideration to one journal at a time. So for example, this one article that I have that I wrote with 2 students has been submitted to the Journal of School Counseling, and it is under review. I can't get tired of waiting and decide now I'm going to submit it somewhere else. I have to wait, and because they have it, I can only submit to one journal at a time. So once it gets published, whether in whole or a substantial part, then I can't submit it for publication somewhere else unless I get permission from the original publisher. Counselors who review material submitted for publication, and I'm a reviewer, research or scholarly purposes, respect the confidentiality and proprietary rights of those who submitted it. So a lot of times the journals will do blind review. So I'm a reviewer, for example, for the Professional Counselor, which is NBCC's journal. When I review for NBCC, when I review for the Professional Counselor, it's a blind review. I don't know who the author is when I'm providing my review. For the Professional School Counselor, which is ASCA's journal, I'm an associate editor. And so first it goes through a blind review process, and 3 reviewers do a blind review. They don't know who the author is, but when it comes to me, I know who the author is. I make the final decision. Is it accepted for publication? Does it need to be revised and resubmitted, or is it rejected? So it's really important. I can't go around talking about who those authors are and what they've submitted. That is confidential. So we make publication decisions that is based on valid and defensible standards. And we review article submissions in a timely manner based on their scope and competency in research methodologies. We serve as reviewers at the request of editors or publishers, making every effort to only review materials that are within our scope of competence and to avoid any personal bias. And that is research and publication.